All right. Well, welcome back to the Temporal Eternal podcast. We are so stoked that you are with us. Once again, Temporal Eternal is all about having eternity in the forefront of our minds, right? That, we believe as Christians that there is eternity in heaven with Jesus, and that within our decision making, within our priorities, that we should be thinking about eternity and not just the temporary things. And we have a special guest joining us today, Pastor Daniel. He is the associate pastor at Reveal Church out in Surprise, El Mirage area, Arizona. This is actually my home church where I attend. Since we kind of checked a couple of churches when we moved here, and we really just felt like God drawing us to this church. So it's been a huge blessing to us in our time of really stepping away from full-time vocational pastoral ministry. And him and Pastor Marty, the senior pastor, have been just a really blessing to me and my wife, Azzy. So Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. We're stoked to have you, and we have a fun topic today. Myself, obviously Daniel, and then Matt is with us, and I wouldn't say a fun topic, but a really kind of interesting and deep topic, which is just the role of the father, right? And just how God has set up the family unit, right? And how more and more we can see that in different ways the family unit has been attacked, I would say at the very least spiritually, right? And how prevalent fatherlessness is. I have a couple statistics to start us out, and the first one is according to U.S. Census Bureau, 19.5 million children, more than 1 in 4, live without a father in the home, and that was in 2018. And so it's a staggering statistic. My father personally has worked in the prison system. I remember when I was a teenager, I was such a punk, guys, and I'd be like, yeah, my dad's in prison. And they'd be like, what? And I'm like, I'm just kidding. He's a prison pastor. But I just I had to really have fun with it. But my dad, but my
Street
dad,
cred.
that's street cred, bro. Especially where I'm from. I'm from Brockton, bro. I'm from Hood. But my dad, he told me he heard some different statistics because he did a lot of counseling with men in the prisons he worked at. But he said the vast majority didn't have a father. I looked up online, and I've seen stats I've heard anywhere between 70 to 90%, so 80% on average of inmates in prisons in the U.S. do not have a father. And so I think the lack of a father or that type of father-like role model in people's lives, and there's a lot of other statistics we could bring up, has a great impact on people's lives. And I get the political construct, and we're not here to reduce the role of a woman or of a mother, but more of just emphasize that the role of a father is important. And I think that, unfortunately, not by a lot of people's decisions, it's happened like that. So I'd love to kind of just open it up first to you, Pastor Daniel. Like, what are your thoughts about that statistic, and maybe how do you approach your life, right, of being a father, and then also even ministry in general?
Well, and I think one of the biggest things for me is I'm a first generation Christian, so not growing up in a Christian home. I used to go to a Baptist church with my grandmother she took every Sunday, and I still think back to, I don't know why we went over to my grandmother's house every single weekend. I'm not really sure if it was just my parents were working or they just wanted to get rid of us. But I did grow up in a home where my mother and father were married for close to about 20 years until they did get divorced. But not growing up in a Christian home at a real young age, at 9 years old, I remember being at the altar and just having this overwhelming experience that God was real. And I know there was a little bit of fear of hell being young, but more of it was just this emotional experience that I had at a young age. And I remember being 9. And so going home on the weekends and going home from being with my grandmother, and then going back to the home where my dad would criticize a lot of what happened in the church, and a lot of things about the church. And then when we would act up, he would kind of throw those things in our face and say, well, did they teach you that at Sunday school? And so this constant criticism of me trying to find my faith as a child, and then just what it was that my kind of that confrontation, the combating of it, that would come from my father. So just over the years, whatever it was that God started in me, He continued to do in me. And so I guess just starting in that place of just knowing that I am a first generation Christian. So I've never really seen this thing done before, on what it looks like to be not just a good father and a good husband, but also just really what it looks like to be a spiritual leader in the home. And that for me became one of the biggest challenges, especially as I continued on in my years as a father, of what was it to be a spiritual leader in the home. And I think one of the things that we do as men, in what I did, was I really played to my strengths. I still, through a lot of healing that God has done in my heart with my father particularly, is I've just learned to really have to create closure with some things that happened with what my dad wasn't for me. I looked and saw a lot of the hand that he was dealt growing up as well, and so he was a great provider, and he was great at discipline and disciplining us as well. So I think I played to those strengths even as I became a father, because that's all I'd ever seen. And so when it came to this whole spiritual leadership, it was just something that was completely foreign to me. And I started to find out later on how much I lacked. And I guess if you could say, the goal is to be whole. The goal is to be a whole man. And many times what we do is we end up playing to the strengths of what we're good at, because I can provide. I provide for my family. I do well for my family, and that's what I do well. And the other stuff, I'll just kind of let that stuff be what somebody else fills in the blanks for me. But just a deep conviction came later in life of that I wasn't a whole man, and that was scary. It was scary. So when you talk about the statistics, just going back into the initial question, is we actually had, it was funny, my father had actually given me he presented this to me, and he presented, it was on my birthday, and it's called the resolution. And he actually signed it. And it was a book off of, it was called the Resolution for Men. And he gave it to me, and he didn't even really know what it actually meant, but he gave it to me, and he did it like as a surprise for me. And just his intention of trying to do something, I think he thought that moment would create everything, that all the gap of what he wasn't as a father, and that he was just going to kind of hand that over to me. But when I began to read the book later on, and just the way that it all worked out, it was to begin to hear the statistics like you said, and to realize, like, not just the epidemic of fatherlessness, but also the in the church, that became even more alarming to me, is that the statistics, it was like 90% of young people that grow up in the church leave the church when they become of age. And not 20%, not 30%, not even 50-50, but a huge percentage would leave the church. And so it just became this whole dynamic for me of trying to, I didn't want to become a statistic. And obviously the statistics were stacked up against me, but also the inability to know what this looked like was scary.
Yeah. And I think we should make a point too, as you're talking about that within the church. There's if we go and say, hey, in 2018, they said a quarter of the U.S. children didn't have fathers. I'd also venture to say as well, what about the fathers that lived at home but were absentee fathers, didn't have Jesus as the forefront of their minds, or really have a biblical example, right, of a father? I mean, yes, we are imperfect, but we should model ourselves as our heavenly Father, right? And so if you think about it, like seriously, if you go, okay, a quarter of kids, and it's probably worse if it was 2018, so
Right.
4 years ago, it's probably it's at least that or more than likely. That's what I would bet if I was a betting man. If a quarter is fatherless, then how much are fathers that aren't participating in the right way of discipling and mentoring their kids? And sometimes, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's not because of ill intent. It's just because of
Right.
lack of maturity, lack of knowledge, prioritizing um, career, prioritizing finances, prioritizing other things over the spiritual well-being of their family and their kids. And that's people in the church as well. I mean, that, let alone people who don't even have a Christian or spiritual background, right? So I think
Some
the
people prioritize church over their family. So, I mean,
what'd you say?
some people prioritize church over their family,
Totally,
and
100%. Yeah,
that's a lot of Christians. They put that out there, and it's like you do that, and it's like you're hurting your family just by going to church as much as you can and not paying attention to your family.
yeah,
Mm. Right. And I like what you say there, because I think that that's a great on ramp back to it, Don, as well, where you say that it was my dad was there for me as a provider, but there was this other part, that this nurturing side that I never really thought that a man was supposed to be, and I never really having emotional conversations. I remember when my wife and I were dating, we had a really tough conversation. Or we were actually going to split up, and I went over, and I was in tears, and I'm talking to my dad, and I'm like, here's the point where my dad's going to give me the great advice, and I said, Dad, I don't know what to do, and I just poured my heart out, in a rare moment, and my dad just looked at me and he goes, well, there's other fish in the sea. Like, thanks, Dad. Like, I appreciate that. So with having that kind of an emotional connection, you don't really realize it. I'm gonna tell you this, even Don, you don't really begin to see, and as your kids begin to get older and begin to get into their teenage years, and everything that you've done in those younger years starts to amplify as they get into 13, 14,
mm,
testosterone, all the hormonal changes. So they start to become really who they are. When those things, it amplifies everything so it's like if you built something and you poured into them, and whatever they are, whatever they've experienced emotionally, whatever it might be, that ends up becoming what they are, and you see it, and it becomes. And I think that's where a lot of times parents will say, well, hey, they're just going through the teenage years. And I've realized now, after I have 4 children, so after going through with a couple of them and looking through the patterns, that 13 to 17-year-old range is such an important range
yeah. It's
of
pivotal.
yeah, completely. But I became that absent father because I was doing well with work. I was doing all the things I needed to do as far as work went, and I almost felt like they owed me because I was giving them everything that they had, and my perspective was off, and I really started to lose my family. So even being in church and doing all the right things, like you were saying, it's like I think there's this identity crisis that we have sometimes in trying to find our identity, and that's kind of where I found myself, was just not really. I tried to wrap myself up in my work and find my worth in my work, and I was losing my family in the process. So
Yeah, I find it fascinating how when people can do that, especially, it could be men or women, but especially men when it comes to work, how we can feel entitled and how we can feel. I
mm,
remember a pastor telling me, it was really phenomenal, but he said, um, when leaders fall into sin, a lot of times they justify it because they start to pity themselves and start to like
right,
feel entitled for, well, I do this and I do that, and like that's such an easy cop for me. Like I can easily do that with Azzy and the kids, and I did do that because I was working or I was serving the Lord and I was doing this and that, and I missed the perspective of like what is my role, like, and my role is yes, is to provide for my family, but it's also to provide for them, not just monetarily, right? But emotionally, right? And don't get me wrong, like I am not against if Azzy was the one that wanted to go be a lawyer, I'd be like, hallelujah, girl, let's do this thing. Well, I am not a traditionalist in that sense. She wants to be a stay-at-home mom, so I support that dream. So don't hear me here. But what I'll say is that regardless, there are some things that God has called us to do, right? And there's needs in our families that are important, and those are emotional and spiritual support, and they're also leading, right? And I think that's like one of the most important things is, man, like leading my kids. I stepped out of ministry because I wasn't in a good place, right? I was not in the right place at all. I wasn't even aware of it. I didn't even see it for a number of years. But I look back and I thank the Lord that he pulled me out of ministry, because the path I was going was not a good one. And I potentially, wouldn't be with Azzy. I don't think, because I wasn't prioritizing my marriage, even without like the sin stuff, like the sin struggles that I was going through. I wasn't prioritizing my marriage. But then also, I was laying the groundwork for my children to hate the church by the schedule and by the prioritization of my life, my energy. I mean, here's a big one, and then I'll let you continue. Something I had to realize was I'm a big football fan, and especially in ministry, but I had this principle of, I'm going to leave it all out in the field. I go to work, I leave it all out in the field. And for many, many years, and finally I did get to a place where I started to have a little bit of self-awareness of this, where I went, when I get done with work, that's halftime. That's halftime. And so I better have some emotional, spiritual capacity, energy to continue with the rest of the game, because that is only the first quarter or two. And what I would do is I would work my tail off, be exhausted. This is literally what I did, Pastor Daniel. Be exhausted, not be engaging with my wife and kids, feel bad because I worked so hard and stressed out, played video games till 1 or 2 in the morning, not get enough rest and sleep, and then just repeat day after day after day. And that's why I stopped. That's why me personally, I had to quit video games, because the Holy Spirit convicted me, and I was like, that was escapism for me. It was, I love video games, but it was a stronghold for me. It was an imbalance. And I wasn't properly resting and participating in my family, and no matter what it is, I mean, it can easily happen that we can get so enthralled with something else. It doesn't have to be pornography or alcoholism. It could be a hobby. It could be work, but that it really takes away from what God really wants you to prioritize, which is your family.
Right. No, and I think that even to the I really started to realize, because even what you're saying is I had a lot. I was very disciplined, so I had a lot of things down. I was working. I was going to church. I had all the boxes checked, and one of the things that I always said that I wouldn't become was just being legalistic. And it was funny, because a lot of times I always say that the things that if you're not careful, the things that you resent, you become. And in my family, on the surface, anybody could see, you got a good family, you got a good looking family. They show up to church, they do these things. You guys have, man, they just have it made. And you just think that you've arrived, until I started to feel this, and it was 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago, where I started to feel this tension between my oldest son and myself. And I sat down with my family, and I'd made more money that year than I'd ever made in my life. And I sat down with my family at the table, and we all went around, and I asked the question. I said, if you guys could gauge your spiritual well-being, if you could put a number to it, I'm a scale of 1 to 10 guy, where would you put it at? And be honest. And so all 6 of us, my 3 sons and my youngest daughter, we sat around the table, and it was 4s and 5s. And it was honest. And so just understanding that on the surface, it looked like the spiritual well-being, that we were doing well. But underneath the surface, in those honest moments, it's like there's trouble on the horizon. And I think that the tension that I started feeling with my oldest son and I, sometimes you can chalk it off to just we're just going through it. That's just what it is, and all these other excuses that you can kind of try to just brush it under the rug. And I saw the way that it affected my wife, because she would see the tension between my son and I felt it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I had an experience where I actually had tore my rotator cuff, and I say that was a place where God kind of just turned my whole world upside down, because He slowed me down. He slowed me down. It wasn't video games. I was a workaholic. I would work 7 days a week, and I like keeping score, and I'm in sales, so I beat people, and so I just had that was where um, that was where I was going to my extreme in, and to look at it and say, I remember just having my hand. It was my right hand too, and I remember my right shoulder, and just I felt totally debilitated, and I felt like God began to show me who He really revealed a lot to me, and here's this is the words that I remember, is the image bearer, because as men we're called to be image bearers of who God is to our children. And so as children we connect who God is based off of a lot of times who our fathers are or who they weren't. And so as I be the image bearer that I was being, I got to see the fruit of that in an honest moment that my oldest son and I had, Israel. And the tension got to an all-time high, and I was really humbled and slowed down because of the injury that I had, and God had kind of stopped me in my tracks. And we had an honest moment, and the things that he would say, um, all he ever wanted was my time. Um, I had tried to find my identity in boxing, and I was training a professional fighter. And if you guys have seen the Rocky movies, the Rocky movie with Rocky and Tommy Gunn, and when he began, his son keeps coming along, and Rocky and Tommy are, you know, all Rocky cares about is reliving his life through Tommy Gunn. And then here comes his son. He's like, "Hey, Dad, look at what I did." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, anyways, like I was saying, Tommy," and we talk about it all the time, that was our story. That was who we were becoming. He was resenting me, and I was trying to find my identity. If I'm honest, I wanted to be somebody, and so he ended up just to, and I'll flip it back to you, but to see that in that honest moment, Israel he took on boxing. He was a really good boxer. He would go and spar, and he told me in our honest moment, he was 17 years old. And it was a point where I felt like I was starting to lose him. And he said, "You know what I would say, Dad?" He goes, "I said that if my dad's God is anything like my dad," he's like, "I don't have nothing to do with them."
Wow.
And, you want to talk about a reality check. And I still get emotional no matter how many times I say it, is when you start to realize that you aren't a whole man, and you don't know how to be a whole man if you're really honest with yourself, because of what I've seen and what I've had. No one showed me how to live this out. It brought me to, I'd say, my greatest point of surrender in my life, was saying, you know what, I can either choose to be a coward and hand that down to my son, and that when he gets to a place where he has a family and he's being half the man that he needs to be, and he's unequipped, but he has to figure it out, or I could spend the rest of my life trying to figure this out. And it was a pivotal decision for me, but I knew that the only way that I could become whole was by the one who was whole. And that's not spiritual talk, that's real talk.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, "Son, I'll spend the rest of my life, till I die, I will do everything I can to give you the best image of what a father looks like, so that you can emulate that to your children one day." So
Yeah, I think.
That's
Oh, go ahead. Were you say something, Matt?
that's just so good, so good.
Yeah, I think the kind of something you said too. I I'm really big on self awareness, because that was kind of the thing the last couple of years that really opened my eyes to my depravity, to my mistakes, to the things that I was going through. And I think you hit it on the head. I think that a lot of men don't know, they don't realize kind of where they're off base. And also, some of them just, it's an identity thing. Their identity is wrapped up in certain appearance, performance, priorities, and in such a way. And the truth is, too, and this is what's dangerous. And this is what's dangerous in the church with religion. This is what's dangerous is that identity, what happens is we start to make decisions and start to prioritize things in our life. And then eventually it starts to get gray, and it doesn't just become a priority, but it really just becomes our lifestyle. And then eventually it just becomes our reality. And it would be foreign to think any different. Like for you, because I'm a workaholic too, like 100%. And I still have to watch that, because I am very much performance driven. I'm super busy. I always have a lot of things going on, and I'm like really, I'm aware of it. And I'm just, being careful. I have to be careful of it. Even when I am prioritizing my family the correct way, you can still do it. But I'll say that, like, with a lot of people, it's foreign to them. Like, it doesn't even, it's like another language, like, to think about it. Right. And because whatever that is, hey, I'm a good father. I do this, or I am this for them. But yeah, I mean, I guess to ask you, and then I'd love to spend a few minutes on just the church and this issue in general. What would you say are some, for maybe somebody who is a father, maybe somebody who wants to become a father, maybe who's somebody who is, maybe have a young child and it's their early on. What's some like red flags? What are some, because I love to give some application to, what are some things some questions they should be asking, or some points in their life of reflection that they should be looking at and going like, okay, this might be something I need to be careful of if I'm noticing these things?
Great question. Great question. I think here's this phrase, and it's one that stuck with me, is, and like I said, we notice it as they start to get older, as they get 14, 15, 16. And what do we say? Is we say they just don't listen anymore. They're hard-headed teenagers. And this phrase of whoever has their heart has their ear. Hmm. So once you've lost their ear, there's a direct connection between their ear and their heart. So the minute that they stop listening to you, and it kind of changes the way they listen to where they have to listen. As they start to become teenagers, it's another phase of parenting, to where you start to kind of, it's like a transitional phase. And as you start to notice, again, if you lost their heart early, then you'll see it in the lack of influence. Because ultimately, when they listen, every parent wants to have the max amount of influence, because they're like, I care about you more than anybody else. Yeah. But I think that phrase of whoever would have their heart would have their ear. And it's one of the hardest things, I think, to really be, like you say, self-reflective and honest about, is when your children aren't listening. What I've learned is that, especially over the last, I'd say, 8 years, and is that I have to self-reflect and say, where is my responsibility in this? Because what is my role in this? And once Israel and I went through what we went through, and I told him, anytime I felt like there was anything between us, and you feel tension, yeah, it's like we've got to squash this. Yeah. And because I know that if it builds up long enough, I'm going to lose his ear once I lose his heart. So when your heart feels connected, with your wife, in relationships, we know when there's tension in the relationships. And if we're honest, we know what with our children as well. But sometimes we're just really not willing. We just have almost kind of heard that oh yeah, well it's just part of parenting. Well, no, it's not. I don't believe that. And I've seen that is that if there's tension between my children and I, and it's not just about me removing the tension by them understanding what they did, because that works when they're young, when they have to. But when they start seeing they got options in this as they get older, then they do it because they want to. And
Yeah.
so you've got to be really, really. My favorite two words consistently in my family are "I'm sorry." When I miss it in any way,
Yeah.
really, when I miss it in any way, when I say anything, when I do anything, when I am habitually, and not just I'm sorry to cover it, but I'm sorry, and I don't want to have to say I'm sorry for the same thing twice.
Hmm.
I want to say I'm sorry, and next time I feel that, I don't want to do that, whether it be the way that I react, or I always reflect internally and say, so that phrase, going back to your question of whoever has their heart has their ears, like I've always, and I've recognized it ever since with Israel, and then I have my other children. So I always recognize the tension, and when there's tension, I need to be attentive to the tension, and I can't sweep it under the rug, but I've got to be able to take it head on. And every time that I've done that, it's like that same tension that builds
Yeah.
immediately can be gone, especially when I
Hmm.
take responsibility for my part.
That's really good. And I think too, I'd add to it is like, and I was talking to, for last week's podcast, I was talking to Sean Sanseverino, and we are talking about a bunch of different things on reflection and God transforming our life. But there's one thing I added, and I'm going to add it to this situation too, is, and I can totally admit, like, where I've seen this even with my oldest son, my oldest child, who's Donnie, who's 5, is I am aware sometimes. The issue is that I have created, and this kind of goes with you and I's, actually all of us, Matt has a struggle too, actually, is workaholism and doing too much, busyness. I have set a stage and a standard of busyness in my life that makes it difficult for interruptions, not only by the Holy Spirit, but by
Mm.
my family. And so not only are sometimes, yes, there's awareness issues, but sometimes there's awareness issues, but I'm like, oh, I'll get to it later. And then I don't
Right.
prioritize it. Or I know my son wants to spend time with me, or I know we want to do this, and then we justify it by, hey, I'm doing the greater good because I have to provide for my family, or I have to go take care of this, or I have to go take care of that. And I'm at a point in my life right now, just with full transparency, is like my personal goal is to own a little bit of real estate, to have a little bit more financial freedom from my family. And I have like a 5 to 10 year plan. That being said, as I've started going towards this and looking at this, I've also, on the same side of things, have said, my son is 5 years old. In 10 years, he's 15. And by then, I mean, it's a couple more years, and then, he's there. And so for me, I have to straddle this thing back and forth where it's, hey, I am trying to work hard and save and invest and do things for the future of my wife and my children financially, but also make sure that I am not neglecting their spiritual and emotional health, and not only
Mm.
growing our family financially, but growing them spiritually and emotionally. And if I just focus one way, I'm gonna miss out. And I think finances are the reality of it. We're in the middle of inflation, in the year 2022, and those are some real challenges and real issues. But we need to be careful that we don't lose perspective, because our time with our children is limited, right? It really, really is. So, I'd love to, as we kind of, get near the end, but I want to spend a few more minutes on this, is like, man, how do you approach ministry, right? And just, in the church where we see those staggering statistics, and you work heavily with youth and young adults. And that's something that is, real, right? Is that you see kids from homes that are broken homes, or challenging homes, or whatever it may be. How do you approach ministry? And maybe how should the church, like, what is the church's role? What should we do as a church within these people? Because I will say this, I believe that the issue of fatherlessness is 100% a priority for those 18 or younger, but also I believe it's just as much a hole in the heart for somebody who's 50 years old, who has dealt with this and have had this baggage their whole life as well. So I think that issue is there's no age limit for that issue, right? So how do you handle it? And I think, and then I'd say how us as Christians should be addressing that and stepping up to the plate.
And I would say it was interesting because um, and whether it be my wife, whether it be my children, there was a season where the whole boxing thing I was telling you about, it became to where when I realized that, I'm like, I knew the commitment that I made to my son that day, and I am one that if I say it, I mean it, I mean it, I say it. And I said, son, I promise you. And I looked him in his eyes, and I was trying to love on him, and he was like, yeah, Dad, whatever, this is weird. And at that time, and I said, son, I promise you that no matter what, like I will live this thing out. I promise you that. So I told him I'm willing to, like, and I was going to let go. I had my top boxing prospect, 25-0 as a pro. And I'm like, listen, my kids at that point, even my wife, and I was serious about it. It's not like I'm just bluffing that I'll leave everything for you guys.
Yeah.
And it's something that happened in my heart, though, because for me to walk away from boxing and all the people that I met and the identity that I had wrapped up in it, I realized that the most important identity, the thing I was going to be most responsible for, that I was called to steward, was my family. And I remember having this vision of saying that one day when I get to heaven, and I'm waiting for God to be able to tell me either well done or smack me upside my head, that all I was going to need to do was just to turn around and look at the legacy that I left behind me, and to see what did the generations behind me, what was the result. That was going to be my greatest, I guess, reward, was what I left behind. And so that became my ultimate, was just saying, you know what, I'm willing. This is the most important. So I say that to say that I took a season, a period of time, where it was about 5 to 6 years, and
Wow.
I quit trying to save the world. I quit trying to save the world, where I'm
That's
like,
good.
if my ministry time's over, if everything's over, I'm taking this space. And the greatest thing that I can leave here doing is teaching my children how to have a personal relationship with Jesus, and what that looks like, and for them to see the benefits of, when I spend time connected to my Creator, to my Father, I'm a better brother, and I'm a better sister. So my kids started to recognize at a young age. So I knew that the best thing, my most important role, was to teach them and to allow for them to connect with Jesus in a real and raw way, where it was their choice, where they saw the benefits in it, where we'd go and we'd spend time worshiping, we'd spend time reading, and they knew that it wasn't just because I said it, because they knew they were better people because of it. And so that was so that time that I took in doing it, especially in the 8, 9, 10, 11, leading into those teenage years, was so important for my children. And then transitioning into the other part of the question is I didn't know if I was ever going to do ministry again.
Yeah.
But now I see what God did in those 5 to 6 years, was teaching me how to be a father and prioritize my family, to where they never questioned. And we knew what it felt like for the church to be second, because I'm called to be a father before I'm called to be a minister. So if it ever came down to one of the kids at the church and one of my own kids, my kids know who I'm going to choose, and that's who I have my greatest responsibility for. So just seeing that, and seeing the way that they were able to, then they began to be a part of everything that this, and I guess it's the second round as far as ministry goes. But to see the way that they responded once they knew that I had their hearts. Going back to that, once I knew that I had their hearts, and we had established that relationship, no matter what things they did or didn't do, or fallings that they had, they knew that there was a security that they had in who God was to them, based off of who I was to them. And it goes back to being an image bearer. So that was I think the greatest thing is this, to understand that. And I had to come to that realization. I'll say this, and I'll flip it back to you, and let you tell me the part of the question I didn't answer. But when I realized that I could go out and I could go out and try to save the world. And us type A personalities, we have that. I'm gonna go save the world. Yeah. I'm gonna do, and to have that mentality, and to realize that I could go out and save the world. I could save this young man who was a professional boxer, and I could have this great career with him. I could go out and save this person and that person and create this identity. But if all at the cost of losing my family, everything that I built would fall, it would crumble.
Yeah.
And then when I came, I'm a math guy, and he said that if you can duplicate who you are in each of your children and the relationship you and I have, Daniel, with each one of your kids, now you've got 4 times the number of people going out there into the world to make a difference. And
Yeah.
so you've just increased your odds in being able to go out there and do that. So that was just a piece for me that I had to come to a place where, like, I don't care if ministry ever comes back along. I know my greatest ministry is creating disciples in my own home.
No, totally. And I would say too, for some people, like I've realized, like I never thought I was going to preach again. Right. And I've told Daniel this, we've had some conversations about it. I'm actually not preaching at the church I talked to you about, but, eventually I will. But, I decided the Lord said no for that one, but I never thought I would again, but now the Lord's kind of brought that back up. And so I do have on my heart a little bit, this thought of maybe I'll travel and preach again a little bit and go to a few places and stuff. But I do have enough of an awareness of the season that I'm in, which I have young children. And I go, maybe that will come to a time, but I know that in my current season, this is what I need to be prioritizing and stewarding. And so I think having that awareness too of like, hey, like whether that's your career, whether that's, your marriage, whether that's you individually, right? Just realize like the season that you're in. Like for some of us, some of the people listening that might not have kids, right? And they're like, well, how's this relevant to me?
Right.
Well, like look at the season that you're in, right? Like look at what God's doing in the season, how he's molding you, how he's shaping you, right? Like what he wants you to prioritize. And the same thing for me. I'm like, okay, right now in the season, like I am super apprehensive. I've been like that with Pastor Daniel and Pastor Marty with my involvement with Reveal Church, because I want to be careful that I don't like repeat the mistakes I made before, because a lot of my mistakes happened in a place of like doing it for the Lord, in the name of the Lord, but maybe good intentions, but maybe actually not obedient to God. And you
Right.
hear me today, like you could be doing something for God in his name, but without his calling. You know what I'm saying? Like, cause he's like, hey, I know you're trying to do this, but I'm actually wanting you to prioritize something else, Donald. And so I think just having an awareness of the season you're in, what God wants to do in your life. Some of you go, but I have a dream. Yeah, I get that. I get it. But you're, first and foremost, you're called to steward your family, steward your kids. Like, and you look at the New Testament, and they talk about like deacons and elders, right? And leaders of the church. And it's like, hey, if you need to take care of your family before you lead other people. And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in that position. And then there's obviously I was looking it up as you're talking, Proverbs 22:6, which is train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Right. And so that means like, hey, we need to be training them up as they go. Right. Like, and that talks about the 90% thing you were talking about is like, hey man, like, we don't train them that like you have to go to church. We train them of why you go to church. We train them why Jesus is so important. And really a lot of that is displayed out of the abundance of your relationship with Jesus. So we're not teaching religious behaviors, but we're teaching a lifestyle of humility, of repentance, and of transformation. And when we show that, then it can be caught, because that's the difference. Is we're trying to, this is the difference between discipleship, right? Discipleship is not about teaching. It's about catching. It's about walking with somebody and seeing their life, seeing their failures, seeing their successes, and catching it. That's the key. And really, that's how we should be leading our kids in the long run. Is yes, we need to teach them some life lessons. I get it. But if all we're doing is teaching and they're not catching our life, then we really need to check ourselves and go, all right, God, how much of a priority are you in my life? How much of a priority is church in my life? Have we went crazy on our schedule? And I get it. I'm about to step on some toes, especially if people see that Pastor Daniel's on, and I get some youth parents that are listening to this. How many sports events are we doing? Are we scheduling? What type of culture and what type of lifestyle are we training our kids in as a family and individually with what you're allowing them to prioritize, because they will continue that same lifestyle into adulthood. So if it's working a lot, if it's participating a lot in a lot of hobbies, if it's watching a ton of TV and it's not participating in prayer, reading the word, going to church, not to say it's impossible, but you're really making it hard for that us to change the ratio of 90%. Right? Which is, that's that percentage that Pastor Daniel was saying, right? Like that there's tons and tons of young people that are leaving the church. So I think that's key. I think maybe the last thing, because you said maybe the question you didn't answer, what would you say, like in the church we can do, maybe not even you, but like what you can, like even at our church, both as, as probably more for adults, I would say, what can we do for others who are dealing with fatherlessness, or for young people who maybe don't have that type of role model in their life?
And I do think that there's something about just like I said in the beginning, the goal is to be whole, and it's not that you ever get to a place of wholeness, but I think that's one of the greatest things that I could have learned at a younger age was learning how to be whole. And I think a lot of times it's in us as the older generations, or the generations that are leading them, is to I think self-reflect and say, these are some places where I'm not whole, and I think leading in wholeness, and it's not, and sometimes we try to act like we have wholeness together, but if we're really honest, we're really we're really honest in it. It's like, I am far from being whole. If anything, I'm more of a something whole to a lot of times, and it's it's that I don't know where your mind was going, but so a lot of times I think that the like our desire to be whole, it's something that I recognize that it is going to be something for the rest of my life, and I've seen the most power in the older generation having influence on the younger generation is just being honest. It was my honesty with my children, and recognizing and letting them know that, like, listen, I don't have it all together. That's not an excuse for me not to continue to get it together. That's not where we stop. It's saying, look, we don't have it together. We just did the best we could. I mean, okay, that's kind of a cop out too. I feel feel like it's our responsibility to be able to emulate what wholeness looks like, and to continue to grow in wholeness as well. Because I think that's the biggest thing in all these young people and what they're looking for. Is you've got a bunch of young people that just have these, that either have half of a heart, or their hearts are they're I was trying to think of, underdeveloped, and so they don't even know what wholeness looks like. And I think but they should be able to see that in the church. And I think that's where my transparency with a lot of the young people, because a majority of our young people at church have come from, I always said the two things that we combat is bad religion and bad fathers. And that's not a knock on fathers, just a reality. And I've been a part of that.
Yeah.
And so recognizing and realizing that those are two of the things that they need to be able to see what it looks like. They need to be able to see, even in this whole all the political stuff that's taking place, what does it look like? What is a whole person? That's not an extreme, but what does it look like to be whole? What does it look like to find balance? What does it look like to do those things? And if they can't see that in the church, like, we're supposed to be the light. And so I think the responsibility is a lot of, not to be cliche with it, but if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, and there's a humility that we have to take as the older generation, because I'm older than you, Don, a little bit, but
just barely,
but we have to no, we have to take a responsibility in that, and saying, man, you know what, we want to blame the young people and say, oh, this mixed up this young generation, but who are their parents? Who? Oh yeah, that's right. We were their parents, so we created this generation. So I think it's our responsibility to really be honest and become whole, and take that journey ahead of them and for them, so that we can kind of lead them in that. Because I always say, learn it, live it, and lead it. And we've never really lived wholeness, so we can't really lead wholeness.
Yeah, the quote I was thinking of is, let me see if I can find it real quick. I don't know if it's going to show up. I can't find it right now, but it was like something along the lines of like one generation's compromises is the next generation's like standards, right? And so, um, not to play the blame game, but there's a component to that. The other thing I thought was really fascinating, and it was kind of like actually very similar to what I was saying with me and as parents, with like with being an example for your kids. But I think it's really good is sometimes, in the older generation is, I'm an older generation now to